The Second Seminole War was a tragedy for all Seminoles because during the war they lost their leader and chief, Osceola, who passed away due to illness. In spite of this tragedy, the Seminoles continued to fight and persevere. The Seminoles were determined to remain in Florida rather than being forced out to Oklahoma like most of the Cherokee tribe, on which was later known as the Trail of Tears. Almost all of the Indians were persecuted by the United States Army. However, they would stop at nothing to keep their freedom and their land. Every day that they were not forced out was considered a triumph. The Creek were Indians who were located in Georgia and Alabama. The Southern Creek Indians were encouraged to migrate to Florida by the Spanish. The Spanish needed more Indians to work in their fields, build Spanish towns, and to join as allies. Besides the Spanish needing help, the Creek Indians had their own reasons to migrate to Florida. The tribe had been feuding with other tribes and the Europeans. They wanted to move elsewhere because they longed for peace. In the 1700s, the Southern Creek moved to Florida, although their current towns were very well established. The Southern Creek, as a new tribe, decided to change their name. They changed their name to the Seminoles, which was taken from the Spanish word cimarron, which meant wild ones or runaways. Along the way, runaway slaves would come to them and join their tribe. They were helpful to the newly formed tribe because they knew how to farm. They could help translate for them because they knew the English language. The First Seminole War was fought because the runaway slaves and Seminole Indians could not understand the American culture, and vice versa. The Americans also looked for increased pasture land, which was currently occupied by the Indian tribe. They also wanted their slaves back. The first war started in 1817 and ended in 1818, 1 year later. The Seminoles lost the war, but some were allowed to remain in an unofficial reservation in southwest Florida. There was a 17-year interlude between the First and Second Seminole War. The leader of the Second Seminole War was known as Osceola. Before Osceola was alive, some European settlers from places such as Scotland came to the south and married the Indians. Osceola was thought to have an Indian mother and a Scottish father named Powell. That is why some Seminoles and others referred to him as Billy Powell. Osceola may not have been the leader we know him as today if it weren't for European trade. The cause of the Second War was mainly Andrew Jackson. He became president in 1829, but in 1830, on May 28th, the Indian Removal Act was signed by President Andrew Jackson. This ordered the Indians out west of the Mississippi River. The Seminoles decided to try to stay and fight for their land. This angered Andrew Jackson because he was going to have to go into war. The Seminoles' defiance made President Jackson even more determined to get the Seminole land. In 1835, the Second Seminole War started. When the battle began, no one knew that this was going to be the longest, most intense war out of any of them. Because of President Jackson's Indian Removal Act, Jackson assigned General Wiley Thompson to see that the Seminoles were removed. He found out that they did not intend on leaving anytime soon. Thompson informed President Jackson, and he was ordered to take them out by force. This is when Osceola became recognized as a leader who was determined to resist resettlement. On December 18, 1835, however, while Major Francis Dade was leading over 100 soldiers from Fort Brooke to Fort King, about 180 Seminoles and their allies ambushed the troops. All of the soldiers but 3 died. On the same day, Osceola killed Thompson. The Seminoles were mostly defeated by the U.S. Army after that. A man named Thomas Sidney Jessup took command over the United States Army during the early stages of the war. He kept a diary of what was happening. One of the first captures he talks about is on January 10, 1837. His diary states, 60 Negro prisoners were at the Panasofka Swamp. He continued to say, Adjutant General ordered Major Nelson to join Lieutenant Colonel Foster at Fort Dade and directed the Lieutenant Colonel to proceed with his whole force down the side of the Withlacoochee. Jessup added in by speaking of another battle. 36 additional prisoners taken in the swamp, 1 Indian wounded, Powell barely escaped. Later in 1837, the Seminoles pretended to surrender, but actually ran away to the Everglades. Despite this, General Hernandez captured King Philip. King Philip sent a message to his son, Cochoochee, begging him to come see him. Cochoochee said that it wasn't fair that he was taken prisoner. He tried to win General Hernandez over by giving him friendly notes from Osceola wishing for peace. After that, Osceola went to St. Augustine with a flag of truce. He knew his people had no chance of victory. Osceola turned to one of his friends while there and said, I feel choked up. You must speak for me. General Hernandez gave the troops a signal, then Osceola and his friends were captured. Osceola later died in captivity from malaria. For the next 5 years, there were small engagements, but more and more Seminoles were being forced to move to the Creek Reservation. By 1842, 3,000 to 4,000 Seminoles had already been resettled. Only a few hundred were remaining in Florida. The Armed Occupation Act of 1842 promoted white settlement in Florida. The Second Seminole War was officially declared over on August 14, 1842.
Due to the war and the death of Chief Osceola, the Seminoles and even Osceola himself have become an icon to the United States, especially in Florida. FSU has a team called Seminoles that is named after the determined tribe. Osceola Middle School is named after Chief Osceola, and our mascot is the Seminoles. There is a county in Florida called Osceola County. It is also named after the determined chief. The county is located near Kissimmee. The tribe and the leader, although defeated 3 times, have always been known for their perseverance. When most people think about Andrew Jackson's presidency, they think about the Seminole Wars. Osceola and Seminoles have made a forever lasting mark on the history of our country. When it came to how the Seminoles felt about their treatment and the loss of their chief, the tribe felt that it was unfair. One of the Seminoles, in 1838, said, they look upon us as runaways and would treat us just as they would so many dogs. Osceola was captured, which was under a flag of truce offered by General Thompson Jessup, remains today one of the blackest marks in American military history. A larger-than-life character, Osceola is the subject of numerous myths. His 1838 death in Charleston, South Carolina prison was known on the front pages around the world. At the time of his death, Osceola was the most famous American Indian. The Second Seminole War was a great tragedy to all Seminoles because they lost their chief Osceola to an illness. Even after his death, the Seminoles continued to fight and persevere. Every day that they weren't pushed out of their land was considered a triumph. During this war, we learned that even though they lost 3 times, the Seminoles never gave up. The Second Seminole War was the longest Indian battle in the United States. Also during the war, they claimed over 1,500 U.S. soldiers and cost the government an estimated $15 million. In 1842, with no peace treaty declared, about 3,000 Seminoles have been removed to the Indian Territory. Osceola and the Seminoles have greatly impacted us since we have teams, schools, and places named after Osceola and his tribe.